Well, I'm really excited again today to have another guest on our conversation on animal monitoring and what matters most. I'm Brandon Testing, Director of Corporate Accounts for Select Sire's Member Cooperative. Today, I have with me from Michigan State University, Dr. Augusto Madureira, and really looking forward to our conversation on his work and research as it relates to monitoring and how we can apply it with our producers.
Yeah, thank you
So,
very much.
if you could maybe just give a brief background of yourself and kind of how you got to where you are at Michigan State today.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, thank you, Brandon, for inviting me. I think this is a great opportunity to share some of the insights of technology and how we can better use the sensors to improve management overall in farms. So I'm originally from Brazil. I have an animal science background. I have the opportunity to go to Canada to do my master's and PhD with Dr. Ronaldo Seri. And the main studies that we did there was factors affecting estrus expression and fertility in cows using automated activity monitoring system. And then from there, I moved to University of Guelph. I spent 4 years there, and I have recently joined the animal science department at Michigan State University, mainly working with precision technology, understanding and integrating animal physiology with technologies. So that's a quick how I end up here. So
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe as it relates specifically to animal monitoring, what are you focusing, trying to learn on? What are you diving deeper into today with your current work?
yeah, so there is a new topic, which is a target reproductive management, which is not a new topic, but integrating technologies with synchronization protocols a little bit better. And I also focus a little bit on transition period and how producers can benefit using the technology to early intervene depending on the data that the sensor is giving, and early intervene to reduce diseases on those animals. So this is a little bit of the focus that I have. I have some other studies focus on calving alerts and cyclicity, postpartum, and so on. But this is the main focus of the study.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get right into it. So most, if not all of my work is dealing directly with dairy producers. And this question fits perfectly into your past research and you're doing what you're doing today. We implemented animal monitoring system, or we're thinking about putting in cow manager, and they say, hey, what do I do with my first service timed AI? Should I keep it? Should I get rid of it? What's your answer to that? Where do we begin with answering that question of how do we merge what we do today with an animal monitoring technology that I might bring in?
Yeah, you mean within the reproductive aspect?
Yeah, let's first start on the repro side, and then I want to learn more on kind of the early intervention health side.
Yeah, I think the monitoring system is coming as a tool, and not to replace a synchronization program, but to complement the program. If we start thinking of how the technology can early identify an animal that is cycling, and based on that, you can target them differently. So, for example, you can have animals. You can have animals being inseminated by artificial insemination just based on the estrus detection early postpartum, because of their cycling correctly. Or if the animals are not cycling properly or have an abnormal cycle, you can induce them into a synchronization protocol. I think those are a little bit of strategies that people can use on farms where they can use the monitor to, identify animals that are having an abnormal cycle. So based on that, people can do something earlier to intervene on that. So if a cow is not cycling properly before the voluntary waiting period, so it might be helpful to intervene and then do some sort of a strategy to have a better fertility outcome. And
Yeah,
again, I think this is it's complementing each other, is not taking away one or another. I think
sure.
integration of both is you can improve overall the reproductive performance, and then not then having either of the strategies alone.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of producers right now that are creating what I think you're talking about is almost a hybrid system that allows us to learn what each individual animal, if they fit into either conforming or not conforming, and rather than having them all fit into one synchronization program, we can sort of direct them into, hey, we know that you're cycling and you're doing well, you go this direction, and we know you're not, you're going this direction. Would that be a fair assessment of it?
Yes, I think that's basically what it is. What I see that most producers uses the technology is to rebreed cows. So normally the
Yeah.
first breeding is going to be through a synchronization protocol,
Yeah.
and then for the ones to rebreed, they will rebreed them based on the activity monitor. But I see the monitor gives a lot of data that we are not looking at it right now, and I think that could add a more like a different strategy. So even we have some data that shows that animals show one or two events of estrus before the voluntary waiting period, and you enroll them into a double off sync protocol, they're going to have a better
Yeah.
fertility than the ones that are not showing estrus. So the ones that are not showing estrus, maybe you can target them differently. Instead of just inducing everyone to double off sync, you can kind of do different strategies
Sure.
in there, just based on the amount of estrus that they have before the voluntary waiting period.
Yeah. What any insights or any pieces in terms of what those other strategies could be? Like what have you found and maybe the research that you're doing? So the animals that are conforming well, we're still keeping them into double off sync. Have you found strategies that are more effective for the non-conforming or the non-cycling animals?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There is the group of Giordano's labs from Cornell. They do a lot of studies on target reproductive management and using different protocols
Yeah.
to better utilize the monitors and better have the fertility outcome on animals that actually going to need the synchronization protocol. Um, I think this is a good question because it's every farm is different and each scenario is different. And I think it matters what's going to work for the farm itself.
Yeah.
It depends how the management on the farm works with protocols and the integration of the data itself of the technology. So I think that there is multiple different strategies. I don't think there is one that fits better to say, hey, this is the miracle protocol that you're gonna do, and you're gonna have better fertility than anyone else. I think that there is different strategies that can be used in integrating the technology with a synchronization protocol.
Yeah. So you mentioned this data we're not looking at. There's been a lot of articles and a lot of momentum lately about how underutilized the information that's being created by the sensors is, right? That farms are just scratching the surface. So first, let's stay on the fertility side. Outside of maybe like early cyclicity, is there anything else that you think, I think we've done a really nice job of understanding timing of insemination. We've done an excellent job on our heat detection rates, like the things that make a lot of sense to us. Is there any other areas, and maybe not, but is there any other areas that you see that we're collecting data that we're not using today that could be valuable in the future?
Yeah, so I think, and again, I think is on sensor dependent on how the data is given to the producer. But I think it's something that is interesting is some of the studies that we did with intensity and duration of the the heat that the cow is having.
Yeah.
I think that is a little bit underutilizing. Um, I think that, in most farms and even the systems, the sensor says yes or no on the event, but I think there's more valuable if we added the intensity and duration overall. So in our studies, we look at the high intensity and longer durations. They are often associated with better fertility and lower pregnancy loss, compared to animals that have short events. Um, I think the overall even pattern of activity, how quickly rises and peaks and declines can be a way of helping refine and identifying a typical estrus behavior.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think if overall you look at the information is there, but it's not fully available for people, right? And if we could somehow created this opportunity to uh, characterize those items, we can even identify animals that might need intervention just based on the intensity or the duration of each pattern. So I think there is a next step in there in extracting a little bit of more value from those systems. So
Yeah, so that's something I've that's a great point. So let's dig a little bit. What factors did we find? So the next thing that my brain goes to is the farms that had really high intensity and really long duration, or the cows that did have that. Are there factors? Are there patterns? Are there things that we can do to make that happen? Like if that's an end result of we have better performance, how do we get that? And maybe you're still working on that, or that's not an easy answer, but
mm,
what can farmers do if that's you know in ideal scenario, how do we get to that?
yeah, that's a very good question, and I wish I had a full answer for you. Um, so the studies that we did in British Columbia, we looked at many factors that affected the intensity of estrus. Um, for example, body condition scoring, it's one of them that affects the intensity of estrus. But we also find that the intensity is not a repeatable within animals. So it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that a cow has a high intensity that the next heat she's going to have a high intensity as
Yeah.
well. So we did a few physiological parameters, looking at concentration of progesterone, for example, and how that is impacting the intensity of estrus. But there is not a one characteristic that says, hey, this is um, an animal that is having a high intensity. So I think having a good early cyclicity postpartum could help us to have an animal that is going to be cycling better and having a very good body condition score, and might show a little bit of a better intensity of estrus. But it's still lots of studies for us to do and try to figure that out.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting. And the more we find, the more we don't know, right? Which can be frustrating, but is really
Yeah.
good. So talk to me as it relates to you mentioned early intervention specific to the health side. What work are you guys doing there, and what are you seeing from the data that you're able to utilize?
Yeah, so I think the transition period is a very it's a very interesting aspect. And if you look at data, even like 20 years ago, people were showing that how the feeding behavior prior to calf is impacting postpartum and what's happening to those, right? So I think one is how producers should be using the data into the transition period. I think it's uh, when you look at recovery and adaptation overall. So let's say you're tracking rumination and activity patterns, those can be identify cows that are in a stress or at risk of metabolic or infection diseases. And normally those behaviors change before an actual clinical sign. But I think the key is looking at the deviation on an individual baseline. So how much that animal is changing within itself, and make sure that we track how much the treatment that we early did to the cow is resuming her normal eating and rumination, right?
Yeah.
And I think this creates a little area where I think a lot of researchers are studying right now is what does it mean to do an early intervention, because we can increase the number of treatments on the animals if we're fully based on the activity monitor, but also I think we also have to understand a little bit the data itself, how we look at the monitor and how we interpreted the data. And I think the combination of the cow history, cow production, everything together creates a better parameter. So I don't believe that only having an alert is going to make you create a decision. Definitely a tool that's going to help us to create a better decision making towards that, and having also clear protocols on the farm that is consistent, so you know exactly what to follow. And there is a few studies that are looking at rumination recovery early postpartum and how those animals are performing better later on. So just looking at the monitor itself and seeing the recovery rate from an alert to a treatment and how much is recovering, I think that's one of way of looking at the early intervention on those monitoring systems.
That's really interesting. So when I'm working with the dairy, we're always talking about how do I influence and affect my my removal rate, right? And how can I move dead cows into the sold category, and how can I keep the cows that I sold? How can I keep those as high performing animals within my herd? And it's all about early, right? And one of the challenges, and exactly what you're discussing here, is we got to get to those cows even faster. Not only when they do get sick, but we got to get to them and make sure that they transition well, because that's the lifeblood of what happens.
Yeah.
But we don't have protocols and we don't have a lot of experience of how do we do that. And also, I thought it was really interesting, a recovery rate. Not only did they respond, but how fast did they respond to the treatment? And what you're saying is ultimately we can see that cows that recover faster and at a more effective rate are the ones that are more likely to keep. And maybe that's a basis in which you do. Any other work that, as it relates to early intervention, any suggestions or things that you have seen that seem to be more effective, or any ideas there?
Yeah, so I think this is too an area of interest for researchers, because there is a big concern on early signs in the monitor. So let's say you have an early alert and you go check the cow, she has no clinical signs. And a few days later, she's going to show in the monitor.
Yeah.
But you didn't do anything with the animal because she had no signs or anything that you could identify, but the monitor were able to catch that.
Yeah.
So I think that creates a little bit of resistance on producers to do early intervention, afraid with the fear of treating animals more than they were before.
Absolutely.
And I think that there are some research being done now with just based on rumination and early intervention at calving, and seeing what's happening to those animals later on. So basically, you're creating different animals that are at risk, and then you intervene early on those animals because you know that the likelihood of them getting not cycling or having any sort of disease early on, it's very high. So then you can really intervene for that to to have a better results. But I think it's an area that it needs lots of different approaches, because if you think back in a few years, monitor was based on just for heat detection because that's what it works really well.
Yeah.
But the disease side of it still needs lots of studies, I think, because yeah, I sometimes I just think that we have to work with the producers and work with the companies to make sure that we are using the monitors at full potential, and
Yeah.
the way we can better improve the management of the farm. But I think also teaching producers on how to use the monitor creates a better system. So
Absolutely.
if you have a consistency of it where the producer is checking the cow, not only checking the cow, but also the history of that cow or the production of that cow at that day. I think that matters. Um, yeah,
Almost like a scorecard, right? It's not a we can't treat individual events on a one-time basis or by themselves. We need to know the full picture and the full story of what's going on. I think that
right,
relates to both the health side and the fertility side, right? Where
right,
the data is giving you the ability to make a decision. And what's hard is we're trying to make decisions as black and white for our teams on farm as possible, right? The more
right.
ambiguity that we give, the more mistakes. You mentioned, teaching and getting the dairies to fully buy in and use it. Any tips, suggestions, keys to success that you've seen for farms that are very high performing and high utilization of the systems? Like what do they do well? And maybe as it relates to teaching, any keys to success that your team has had or you've seen?
Yeah, I think the more progressive farmers, I think they use they just don't collect the data, they turn it into action. They have clear protocols to review alerts, deciding what to do, and then following up with the animal. Track trends over time, integrating different data streams and make a proactive decision. I think those are events that successful producers are having, is not only reacting to a single event. So you have multiple aspects of looking at it. I think and again is based on like the consistency and how you check that information. Um, Also, I think having a personnel that is getting that data and looking at the data and making sure you understand and how to interpret that information given by the technology, because I think that's one of the areas that we're lacking now. And we don't want producers not to believe in the technology. When it gives an alert and they go check the animal, they have
Yeah.
no no signs, right? So we have to make sure that we're teaching in a matter of how to implement it in a better way, and how to make them have a better decision making. So I think the top farms or progressive farms are um, making actions
Yeah.
based on the data. I think that's the key of it. Not only looking at the monitor, but having a whole history of the
Yeah.
cow.
I really like that. Don't just collect data, create actions, and it gives you the ability to tell the story of that cow.
Yeah,
And far too often, one individual event or point of data doesn't tell the whole story. And how do you put that together on your dairy? That's really valuable. So
yeah.
what do as we think about the future, whether it's your research or things that are coming, what are you most excited about in the future of animal monitoring? What's got you really intrigued or things that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I think if you think about, I think the first studies that like our lab did, like when I was in Canada, it was 13, 15 years ago, and there were some monitors there that had just activity or just
Yeah.
rumination, nothing together. And if you look at now, you have such a good technology that actually can do and give a lot of valuable information. I think Wedge Events is so fast on that. But I think what I'm most excited is it's moving from this reactive to a predictive management.
Yeah.
Monitoring is already grading, like the system is already great in detecting animals. Uh, but I think if we have in the future using the continuous data to anticipate problems, so health problems, reproductive challenges, or even nutrition gaps that could be based on rumination. So, for example, can we change the diet based on rumination levels in a pen, or anything that we can change it before they actually impact the cow?
Yeah.
I think that will allow a lot of producers to be proactive than just responsive um, to what the sensor is giving.
You've given me some really good sound bites and lines today that I'm going to use in my future. But I love that, right? It's all about um, if so whether it's our ear tag or another system, like all you're doing is putting that piece of equipment on that animal and you're collecting data, right?
Right. Yeah.
And if you just wait to see what the data tells you, that
Right.
doesn't give you a lot of return on investment. So to truly have that, we need to move into a predictive and responsive world and management. And a lot of times, what makes that so difficult is one, you got to have such faith and trust in the data that you're receiving that it's telling
Right.
you a story before your eyes can visually see it. And we've done a lot of that
Exactly.
on an individual basis, but how can we move that to a macro whole herd basis, which is beyond exciting,
Yeah.
but we're nowhere near there. And then we also need to get out of the realm of, I'm really focusing on this, telling the entire story of the cow. How do we collect as many data points as possible to truly tell us before we know what's going to happen, what's going to happen with that cow and how we make it
Exactly.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the challenge right now. I think we went really far on detecting. Yeah, we know the sensor detects, but what is next on the prevention of it?
Absolutely. So last question, if a producer came to you and said, "Hey, I'm considering animal monitoring," what would your advice, key points in terms of things that they should look at? Talking about implementation, like what should, if a producer, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people listen, who knows? But if one producer listened to this and they were to say, "Hey, I should be thinking about this as it relates to a possible animal monitoring system that I may be purchasing," what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that um, a producer should be thinking of, like you're asking me if I should. I'm selling. That's what your question
Yeah.
was. Sorry.
Yeah, just
Okay.
just what questions should they be asking, or what should they, they've maybe done the research, but maybe questions that you would make sure that they're aware of or they're thinking about or want to know more about as it relates to animal monitoring. What do you think is really critical on the producer side?
Yeah, so I think like the critical point is a lot of producers are going into technology.
Yeah.
Some producers too don't believe that technology works,
Yeah.
and I think the main key is uh, adding a technology is going to change the way you farm. Instead of you being every day with the cows, you're going to be checking the computer before you go see the cows. And I think that could be give a lot of values not only on your production overall, but also um, the quality of a life, of a person. I think that matters a lot on um, how do I say this? It's like you're changing now the way you farmed based on what the alerts are giving to you.
Absolutely.
And I think you can rely on that to have a little bit of more time to do other things that you wanted to do. Even if you're working on the farm, you have more time to do other things. If you have now a tool that can help you identify animals that are in need.
Yeah, no question. I think that's really good. Well, today's been excellent. I really appreciate your time. Maybe for those who are listening that want to learn a little bit more about yourself or the work that you're doing, where would they go, or how could they reach out to you if they wanted to reach out and ask questions?
They can find me on the MSU Animal Science Department website.
Yeah.
And it has my email and my phone number. If anyone needs to contact me, feel free to do so. I'll be happy to answer any question.
Awesome.